Welcome back, this is Goku Sun DPC, and welcome back to a new top 10 list. Now, this time I'm looking at 10 of the most key people in modern pop culture. I'm looking really over at people over the past 50 to 60 years that have left a big impact on modern pop culture, whether it be music, movies, video games, technology in general, or other rounds. First, honorable mentions. First up, Britney Spears, which of course is a big influence in modern pop music. Lady Gaga, also more or less the same. In the tech side of things, honorable mention, Elon Musk. Then in more the art, creating incredible pieces of art of movies, Hayao Miyazaki, of course, of Studio Ghibli, and creating some of the greatest anime films of all time. The Olsen Twins, which were juggernauts in the 90s, early 2000s, in general, in every aspect. Yeah, if you grew up in the 90s like myself, you would know the Olsen Twins had huge impact on pop culture for kids in the 90s. Also, Vince McMahon, of course, which would more or less turn wrestling into a big global thing, and of course would end up going to war with Ted Turner and other figures, and we would get the Monday Night Wars. But Vince is a key importance in pop culture for his influence on professional wrestling. Also, of honorable mentions, uh, John F. Kennedy, because he left a big impact on pop culture for the short time he was U.S. president. Definitely, and a lot. It really was an impact on the country when he passed away from assassination. Also, Zuckerberg, which of course is the one who founded Facebook and would be one of the pioneers of modern social media, which would be, of course, Facebook has a huge amount of influence on modern pop culture, given how huge and massive it has become. Now, with that said, there are a couple of ties on the top 10. First, coming in at number 10 is a tie, and it is between George Lucas, which of course created Star Wars, and helped in the creation of some other great films of the 80s, of course, films such as Labyrinth. He was influential in many aspects, and Star Wars would become a huge juggernaut of a phenomenon in pop culture. I mean, it's still huge to this day, even though it's not quite as good quality wise nowadays, but whatever. Still, can't deny the impact and importance George Lucas left, definitely in film and in modern sci fi. Also, tied with him at number 10 is a good friend of George Lucas, and that is, in many people's opinions as well as my own, the greatest probably movie director of all time. Tied at number 10 with him is Steven Spielberg, which has created many of the most iconic films in Hollywood. Easily. E.T., Jaws, which is definitely quite iconic nowadays. Um, Also, of course, Independence Day, he helped do with Roland Emmerich, of course. But still, nothing can be debated the impact of both Lucas and Spielberg. Coming in at number 9, definitely quite an impact on music as a whole in modern pop music and in general, and would end up having the best selling album of all time in sales. Uh, Coming in at number 9 is the King of Pop, as many called him. Coming at number 9 is Michael Jackson, which definitely had quite an impact on music in general. I mean, no one can deny the huge juggernaut influence and success of course, Thriller. I'm not the biggest personally Michael Jackson fan overall. I do like some of his music, and I'll admit Thriller is definitely a great song. I'm not going to debate that, that's for sure. Coming at number 8 is somebody who really influenced modern like talk shows and stuff. Though personally, I don't like talk shows, but I get the importance of this person's influence on modern pop culture. At 8 is Oprah Winfrey, which definitely has had a huge amount of influence, is still very influential to this day. Coming in at number 7 is another tie, and it's between definitely two influential individuals. One of them is of course, led the charge from the 2000s until just this year, stepping down as actual active CEO. And that's that 7, Bob Iger, which led Disney to a huge new era of Disney in power and influence. It was under Bob Iger's leadership that Disney purchased Pixar outright. They bought Lucasfilm, they bought Marvel, and of course, many other things. But the point is, all this was done, and of course, 20th Century Fox, and all this was done under the banner of the High Lord of Disney for many years, Bob Iger. Tied. And tied with him at number 7 is definitely an influential individual in puppetry. He was the master of puppetry and had done so many films throughout the years. His studio definitely are the masters and the greatest at making puppets ever, and of course responsible for creating the Muppets. Coming tied with Bob Iger at 7 is Jim Henson, the founder of the Jim Henson Company, which has created some very iconic films like the original Muppets movie. I mean, you have so many different films, like, for instance, of course, they also did the puppets for Star Wars films, such as Yoda. Coming in at number 6, this person was super important and very influential when it came to television and pop culture for the past several decades. Um, and he, of modern shows that he helped the influence and create, was many CW shows. For instance, his company was behind um, shows such as Seventh Heaven, that a lot of families like. Um, Also was responsible for shows such as Charmed, great show, and many countless others. I mean, they're responsible for some like 30 or 40 shows. That shows how big and massive. Coming in at number 6 is Aaron Spelling. And yeah, their key importance to television cannot be denied over the past 4 decades of television. And of course, they had a really good relationship with CBS. Coming at number 5 at a tie, key importance to music as a whole. Tied at number 5 is first the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. And tied with Elvis is, by most people's opinion, the greatest rock band to ever exist. Tied at 5 with between Elvis Presley and the Beatles. Their influence and impact on pop culture cannot be denied. I mean, no one can deny the importance of the king, Elvis Presley. When I was younger, I didn't care much for Elvis. As I've gotten older, I've gone back and I find myself listening nowadays a lot more to Elvis, and I think the Elvis music becomes more relatable as actually you get older, interestingly enough. And I appreciate that. Like, the voice, just the iconic voice of Elvis, you cannot mistake for anyone else. That's one thing, key importance to him. And his style, like his dress, like the costumes, everything he wore. There's a reason why Elvis is still so highly regarded to this day, and why he is the king of rock. The same thing for the Beatles. Their key importance and influence, and they're the ones who led and began of course, the British invasion of music from England. and I appreciate that. Just such iconic people, such as Ringo Starr, of course, John Lennon, and Sir Paul McCartney. I mean, their importance in modern rock music and music in general. Coming at number 4, the most iconic individual and the one who really led the giant success for the most part to comic books as a whole. Coming at number 4 is Stan Lee, which, yeah, DC, Action Comics, everything been around for decades and before, and a lot of people do bash on Stan Lee for taking a lot of credit for the work of Jack Kirby. I understand that. Jack Kirby, a great imaginary mind. Stan Lee, though, still had a great mind, and he is the father, the one responsible for my all-time favorite comic book series, Spider-Man. So Stan Lee is really key in importance to comic books. Cannot be denied. Coming at number 3 is two individuals that are very important to modern technology, to the computer revolution, if you will, from the 80s to current day. The first of the two, though he technically took a lot of credit for stuff other people did, still, I guess you can't really deny the impact on pop culture of Steve Jobs being the founder of course, Apple, though I think Wozniak doesn't get enough credit for what he did. He did a lot more than Steve Jobs really did. I'm going to try not to turn this into a rant because I'm not a big fan of Steve Jobs as a person. Yes, his influence in technology is big and massive, though I dare say the other person tied with him in third place, I think, is way more important to modern culture because of his influence in every round, whether it be pharmaceuticals, technology. He's the one who made it available for basically everyday person to be able to purchase a computer. And this is somebody who did not take a lot of credit for other people's work. He gave people the proper credit due. Tied at number 3 is Bill Gates. Of course, many years the wealthiest man in the world, and of course the founder with his wife of the Gates Foundation. And a very key influence on many global bodies. Like, he is not only important to technology, he is heavily influenced in modern day, uh, helping other countries like vaccine development and things in Africa and many other nations. And he has really been pushing forward on trying to help the developing world. He invested billions and billions into India to try to help that economy come up in the technology area. And today, we're seeing a lot of the fruits now coming from India for the investment time and effort that Bill Gates put in to help develop more India. And so I think he will be highly regarded in countries over in Asia, such as India and other places, and in Africa. His influence on the United Nations and the World Health Organization cannot be denied. Coming in number 2 is the founder of the Walt Disney Company. Coming in number 2, iconic because let's be honest, there is no movie company more iconic in like American and world pop culture than the Walt Disney Company. And of course, one man is responsible for that, and he would end up creating a mouse which would become the figurehead. And for many years, he would actually voice that mouse himself, that being Mickey Mouse. So, number 2, in my opinion, important figures in modern pop culture is Walt Disney, which his key importance to film and many other aspects and creativity cannot be denied. I've watched probably about 20 different documentaries over the years on the life of Walt Disney. He was a fascinating individual, really, when you look up his history between him, and of course, his brother Roy Disney, and many others. It's just such a fascinating story when you actually learn more about Walt Disney as a person. And bef- last, but before I'm going to do one more honorable mention, another influential individual in the 80s and 90s with the Walt Disney Company, former, of course, CEO at one time, Michael Eisner, which led the known as the Disney Renaissance of the era of incredible Disney films, was led by Eisner. With that said, number 1 most I think, important person in modern pop culture, though technically he goes back 100 years plus, but his influence cannot be denied. He is the one who funded a great, important key figure known as Thomas Edison. He would fund Edison. In fact, his mansion in New York would be the first mansion or building in the world to be fully controlled by electricity with lighting. He was the one willing to invest billions of dollars into Thomas Edison's idea for power stations, of course, theory on direct current. Though today we would use the theory that actually Edison's pupil would, of course, come up with, and of course, that being Nikola Tesla. And that's a fascinating story in itself. I might have to do a vlog in the future of the battle between Tesla and Thomas Edison. But this figure, and of course, his bank is still considered to be maybe the most powerful bank in the world to this day. And that being, of course, Chase Bank, or rather known as J.P. Morgan Chase. The most influential, most important figure, I think, in modern history of the world is, without a shadow of a doubt, J.P. Morgan comes at number one. Because his importance cannot be denied. He is one of the most influential key figures to the development of the U.S. as a powerhouse, backing Thomas Edison with pushing electricity and light bulb. Many other things also J.P. Morgan was responsible for. Plus, he would, of course, end up in a legendary battle, go head to head with, in my opinion, one of the greatest presidents of all time. Of course, that being Theodore Roosevelt. But it was amazing. Plus, he had an alliance with Carnegie, of course, as well as the original John D. Rockefeller. But with that said, this is 10 of the most important people, 10 of the most influential people in pop culture. Leave a comment below. Who are you interested most about? And would you like me to ever do in the future maybe some more vlog thoughts on figures such as J.P. Morgan and the importance of him on America, as well as people like John D. Rockefeller, such as Carnegie, Henry Ford, or, of course, Vanderbilt. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel, and stay safe out there, everyone. Try to stay safe and stay indoors, do whatever you can to not catch the coronavirus. But I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel.